Okay, so let's talk a little bit about marketing. Um, so under the federal marketing rules, and this is still from the Federal Trade Commission, um, but there are some other acts, the Telephone Consumer Protection Act and the Telemarketing Sales Rule, that we'll talk about specifically. But when we talk about marketing, primarily we're talking about marketing tactics, which is uh, different than the advertising piece. And honestly, most of the rules govern telemarketing and door-to-door sales, right? Where the salesperson attempts to come to the consumer as opposed to the consumer, excuse me, as opposed to the consumer going into a retail location or navigating to a retail e-commerce website. All right. Um, so let's Consumer Telephone Protection Act. It's actually fairly um, straightforward. It prohibits auto dialers and not necessarily phone numbers that are automatically dialed, but just like machines that um, basically dial random combinations of phone numbers, and when they ring, play a pre-recorded voice. Um, it doesn't preclude, say, if you've got a call center with a person with a headset, and the computer just has a list of phone numbers from an established database, either sales leads or sometimes just cold calling. It doesn't preclude that, subject to the no call list, which we'll talk about momentarily. But it precludes auto dialers dialing with pre-recorded voice solicitations for business purposes, right? In many states, that type of phone call is permissible for civic, political, or community related purposes, right? Just for business purposes, it would be precluded. And robo-faxes. So you know what these are. I mean, if you've ever had a fax machine or worked at a place that has a fax, you know, from time to time you get these faxes just random, selling whatever, selling, you know, Culligan bottled water or water cooler or, car insurance or whatever, right? And you get them because it's cheap to send, if you've got a computerized fax, you just have it send it to fax numbers. And but that's actually illegal. The robo faxes, unless you've opted in to receive those communications from the marketer. Um, that type of faxing is illegal. All right. Um, there is also the do not call list, which is a recent addition under this act, and all that really was. Um, oh, here it is, right here. Um, if you go and register your number on a certain site, um, it's illegal for telemarketers to contact you. And it was very effective when it was first initiated. Um, I'm not sure if it's still as effective. Um, but that's just part of the telemarketing sales rule. Um, the rest of it really is kind of like the truth in salesmanship. So if a telemarketer is selling something, selling goods, then it really just requires that they be honest about what's being sold and what it actually costs, the shipping timetable, and the performance of the product. So the misrepresentations of a product over the telephone for sales purposes are illegal. All right. Sales. So you guys know from 2080 that most law is state law, right? Federal laws are enumerated, which means what the Constitution says the federal government can do, and um, Everything else is by default to the state. So most sales law is in fact state law, and state sales law is diverse enough to where we really can't get very deep into it, but we can talk about federal. All right. Um, and so let's talk about the Federal Trade Commission cooling off period. Um, and this relates to door-to-door sales. And my slide doesn't say that. I'll update it. Um, but if you buy something from a door-to-door salesperson and change your mind, you have 3 days to get out of that contract, right? And if someone is selling something from door to door, they're entitled to give you a full refund if you notify them that you don't want that whatever you agreed to, even if you agreed to it yesterday and signed and executed a contract, you are under the 3 day cooling period. You can get out of that and you would be entitled to a refund. All right. Um, and the mail order or telephone order merchandise rule. Um, Interestingly enough, um, this was enacted to um, apply to mail order like catalogs and then telephone orders where you call and the seller, you usually provide credit card information and the seller promises to ship goods in a specified time period. So all this really says is that the seller has to actually ship within that time period, and if they're unable to, give the consumer opportunity to cancel and offer a full refund. That's really what that does. Okay, let's talk for a minute about food labeling. You could probably do a whole chapter on this. We won't. So we'll just talk kind of at a high level. Again, Fair Packaging and Labeling Act. Um, so labels on food um, must identify what it is, right? So you don't want to go to the store thinking you've bought, um, you know, potato chips and it turns out it's, pig feet, right? And obviously that's an extreme example, but a better example is you think you've bought, uh, poultry product and it turns out you've bought a porcine or pork product, which could be a big deal, particularly since many religions don't consume pork. So, um, the product, what exactly are you buying? Uh, Net quantity, number of servings, right? How much are you getting? Who made it? And then the packager or distributor. And so, in many cases, the manufacturer and distributor are the same for your national brands. Your Lay's chips, your um, Ritz crackers, or what have you. Um, but in some cases, it's not because you guys know, particularly with store brands, um, you can buy. Um, well, store brands often come out of the same factories as the national brands, right? They may not be labeled accordingly because if you knew that, you would just buy the store brand. So oftentimes, they'll be the manufacturer is identified as a distributor, and usually you can find out where products originate from. Um, okay, um, Nutrition and Labeling Education Act. Um, this requires those nutrition labels that you see on every product, right? And I'm guessing most of you in this class are old enough to where you remember when those weren't required, right? So the idea here was um, nutrition. It was not always easy to figure out the nutritional content of what you were eating, and so this act create a standardized format. And you're familiar with it. You've seen it, the black and white format that gives you calories from protein, fat, and carbohydrates, and sodium, and all that other good stuff, um, in a standardized format. So if I'm picking up two products, I can look at identical charts or identical tables to see which one is more healthy for me. And prior to this law, it wasn't that easy. I would need to read um, products, and each man in different food manufacturers or processors would have different formats, and so there would be some translation. So that was the goal of that act, and it is still in force today. It also regulated certain terms, fresh and low fat. For instance, low fat is in comparison to um, other food items in that group, right? And there's a certain threshold. I think it's 40% or something along those lines that has to be lower to use that label, low fat, right? And that precludes, you know, food manufacturers from just putting low fat on items that aren't, and then consumers just picking it up thinking that the items are low fat when in fact they're not. Um, food, Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act really just provides the process for recall of um, contaminated or harmful food items and products. Um, okay.